Hi folks, and welcome to a very special episode 9 of the Brighton Jazz School podcast. I've had a pretty amazing week really. I spent last Sunday at Tim Garland's house. Tim's a great saxophone player, and we'll be featuring him on a podcast in about 3 weeks' time. But I went there to interview, I think, one of the best pianists in the world currently, and he's just become our patron at Brighton Jazz School, and his name is Geoffrey Keezer. So in honour of Jeff becoming a patron, I've decided to dedicate a whole podcast to him. We hung out that whole day and got a great interview with him. In fact, so much so that I think we're going to break it up into 2 parts. It's almost like an hour and a half. So we're going to feature some of that interview today, and then we'll do some more next week as well. He's also very kindly let us play some exclusive tracks from his upcoming solo piano CD called Heart of the Piano, which is due to be released later this year. So this is a world exclusive. This material has never been played, and I'm bringing it to you, courtesy of Geoffrey Keezer. So in Album of the Week this week, I'm going to feature Jeff's album Falling Up, which was recorded in 2003 and released on Max Jazz, actually for a series, the Jazz Piano series, which they've got there, a series of albums dedicated to the art of jazz piano. And this is a fantastic album. He explores different types of music from, different formats, from solo piano to large ensembles, and he draws from Ellington, Bach, lots of different, and obviously his own stuff as well, which is simply amazing. Jeff is a fantastic composer as well. In the meantime, head on over to brightonjazzschool.com/podcast, where you can find out more information about what we do, upcoming shows, previous podcasts, and the very, very nice, lovely, shiny donation button there. This podcast, as ever, will always be free, but we really do welcome donations because it just makes our life a lot easier. Hosting is not particularly cheap. What I want to do is actually get enough money together so that I can pay for a PRS license so that I can play clips during the Album of the Week section, which I think will really, really make that a much more rich kind of experience for the listeners. So that's the idea. So if you like what we do and you feel like you can spare with a few pounds or dollars, then please head over there and click on the donation button there. That would be very gratefully received. You can also subscribe to us on iTunes. If you type in Brighton Jazz School Podcast into the iTunes store search bar, you'll find us there. We've also got a page dedicated on Facebook. So again, if you type in Brighton Jazz School Podcast into Facebook, you'll find us. By all means, add me as a friend. It's Wayne Mcconnell, your host. And stay tuned. You'll get updated information about upcoming shows. Also, what we're doing at the Brighton Jazz School, which is very closely linked to the podcast. Incidentally, we've got a great concert coming up on the 24th of March. If you're in the Brighton area, it's Saturday, and it starts at 1 o'clock. If you're free, come down. Tickets are £8. It's a charity event, all going to fund Lynn Hazelden's cancer treatment over in Israel. Lynn is a fantastic woman. She's been in the Star Wars movies, and she's a great actress, and she's just really passionate about jazz, and she's really sort of been an avid supporter of the Brighton Jazz School, and you can often see her down at the Brunswick listening to the jam session there. So she's a wonderful woman, does a lot for charity, and now she needs our help. So please come if you're available on March the 24th, and come and say hi. It'd be a great event. Okay, so thanks for joining us. We're going to carry on with a bit of a Geoffrey Keezer biography, and then moving into Album of the Week. And then we're going to feature some of these recordings from this previously unreleased material from his forthcoming solo piano album, which, wow, I tell you, for those Geoffrey Keezer fans, if you thought 01 was good, and in my book it's very, 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 very good, this is just going to blow your mind. It really is. I'm not going to say too much about it now, but let's just say, upon listening to it, I've got another 1,000 years of practice to do before I can ever reach this level. Just absolutely masterful playing from Geoffrey, and you're in for a real treat. So stick with us and check that out a bit later on. welcome to Album of the Week, and as I said, we're going to be checking out Geoffrey's album called Falling Up, which was recorded for Max Jazz in 2003. But before we do that, I'm going to give you a little bit of background information about Geoffrey. Not too much, because he reveals all in this exclusive interview, but just a little bit of a warm-up here. So Geoffrey was only 17 when he became the last pianist in Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers between 1988 and 1990. Geoffrey really comes from that sort of rootsy, bluesy kind of way of playing, although he's got a very advanced harmonic vocabulary, but he really draws from the swing tradition. I don't mean the swing, the style of the swing, but like the emphasis is on groove and swing and the blues. So since Art Blakey died, Keezer's worked with virtually every living legend of jazz: Art Farmer, Ray Brown, Roy Hargrove, Antonio Hart, Christian McBride, Joshua Redman, Dizzy Gillespie. There's not many people he hasn't played with, and Benny Golson as well, and some fantastic albums with Benny. He never ceases to amaze me. He is the consummate pianist. He is able to execute the impossible on the piano, all with this confident rhythmic precision, almost to the point where, I listen to him play and I think he could play any note and it wouldn't matter, because the way he delivers the note, the way he sort of says, okay, this is the note I'm going to play, here it is so confident and rhythmically precise that almost the note doesn't matter. I mean, obviously it does matter, but it's almost to that effect. It just so happens that he happens to know which notes to play at the right time, which is helpful as a jazz musician, obviously. But an absolute master of harmony, a complete master of rhythm, and he just loves melody. He plays a lot of notes, yeah, but I've transcribed a lot of what Geoffrey does, and they're always melodically interesting. He never plays notes just for the sake of showing off his technique. It's all there, it's all intended, and it's all very melodic. So yeah, and James Williams kind of discovered him. And again, I'm not going to say too much about this because he talks about this in the interview, but James Williams produced his first 4 albums and introduced him to Art Blakey and Art Farmer. So James really was responsible for kickstarting Geoffrey's career as a jazz pianist. Keezer sort of started on drums, took to the piano. Both of his parents are musicians, and he took the jazz piano scene by storm, really, featuring on many albums through those different players that I've mentioned, and recording his own albums. I think his biggest album was called Turn Up the Quiet, which was, I think, recorded in 1998, and that was his first sort of big budget recording. I think it was Columbia he recorded that for, and that features some very big names in the jazz world now: Joshua Redman, Diana Krall, Christian McBride, among others. So that's a great one to check out. But as I said, this week we're featuring Falling Up, which is a more recent album recorded in 2003. And it features many of his own compositions, but he also draws from Ellington, and he does an E-flat prelude by Bach right at the very end. So this album features some of the best musicians around. We've got Keezer on piano and Fender Rhodes. He's also playing marimba and vibraphone on this one. The great Ingrid Jensen on flugelhorn, Steve Wilson on alto flute, and a great slack key guitarist from Hawaii called Keola Beamer, fantastic guitarist. The mind-blowing Joe Locke on vibraphone, just absolutely outstanding vibes player. If you haven't heard him, check him out. Richard Cottle on keyboards, Scott Colley and Lawrence Cottle on bass, and the master drummer and percussionist Kareem Riggins. So the album was recorded in Avatar Studios in New York, and also Claire Martin features on one track, and that was recorded in the Denham Grange studio in the UK. So the album features different sort of formats of these musicians, sometimes in trio, sometimes in quartet, and larger formats as well. For me, Keezer seems most at home with the trio format, and one to check out is Palm Reader, which is a great composition by him. And another one is called Navigating by Starlight, which is a sort of slightly more experimental, mystical, dare I say it, even new agey, but it's great, full of melodic and very sort of hypnotic effect on the roads there. I think it's a great chance to hear one of the great slack key guitarists, Keola Beamer, who features on Shiny Shell Lullaby, and a sort of folksy sort of melody called The Horsewoman. And they're really great tunes, but you really get a chance to hear some fantastic slack key playing by the great Keola Beamer. Now, I love to hear Geoffrey playing these sort of larger ensembles, but for me, I love his solo piano playing, and I especially love his trio playing. The way he kind of blends the piano, with the two instruments, the bass and the drums, the way he orchestrates is just sublime, really. And I think that's a direct influence from Phineas Newborn Jr. And if you listen to him in the Ray Brown trio, you really get that sort of big band sound from his piano playing. He did a record in the early 90s called World Music, which was a trio again, and that's really worth checking out. It's a very young Geoffrey Keezer, but it's nevertheless it's a great record, great writing, and some nice rearrangements of some standards on there as well. But I'd just like to play you a little bit of a clip of Palm Reader from Falling Up, because it's again, it sort of exemplifies his way of orchestrating at the piano. So this is Palm Reader. Have a quick listen to this. So there, the interesting thing for me is that he approaches the trio like he does with solo piano. So each particular instrument has their own part, and the way it's blended together is just masterful. There's no throwaway notes. Everything in there is worthwhile and intended. And these arrangements remind me of a lot of what Phineas Newborn was doing in the 50s and 60s. He would come up with these really extravagant arrangements of standards, and James Williams told me that for the most part they were completely improvised arrangements. So in other words, he came up with the arrangements in real time, and I think Geoffrey really kind of likes to play in that way as well. Well, you'll hear that later on when I play some tracks from this new solo piano CD that isn't released yet, but will be later on in the year, and that's called Heart of the Piano. And I tell you, it's something else. So I just thought I'd point that out. It's the way he approaches the trio playing is very similar to the way he approaches solo piano, which is I don't know, not that unusual. I guess it's unusual from the perspective of sort of more younger musicians. They don't tend to do that so much. It's difficult to do. I think that's one of the reasons. You have to have great facility at the instrument to be able to do that. Art Tatum was the great orchestrator of the piano. He would have simultaneous parts going on all over the place, and as did Newborn and Oscar Peterson. Geoffrey's really coming out of that school of piano playing. Okay, so as well as a brilliant pianist, Geoffrey is a great composer and arranger, and I'm going to play you a little clip of Falling Up, the title track of on this album. And what I hope to do is illustrate this sort of orchestral approach further, but this time it's with a slightly larger ensemble. And listen out for the way the piano fits in with the melody, the way that the melodies sort of weave in and out, the drums fit in. It's all like a big jigsaw puzzle that is sort of painting this overall bigger picture. Absolutely stunning writing and arranging. And So I'll play you a short clip from the title track, Falling Up. So there you go, you can really hear this sort of orchestral approach there. Lots of different parts, simultaneous melodies going on, accented chordal things going on, really, really clever and intricate writing. And that's a sort of signature of Geoffrey, really. But nevertheless, as clever as he can get, there's never a sort of over complication of things, you know. There's always something to latch onto. Melody or a rhythm, a groove, or the blues, or something that's sort of well within the jazz tradition. He's never really that far out, you know, and that perhaps that's why I really love his playing so much, because especially with Ray Brown, because you know he would be playing in that trio, which comes from a long lineage of bluesy swinging piano players. I mean, we've got the great Oscar Peterson, then Gene Harris, and a fantastic young pianist, Benny Green, who will be featuring a bit later on in another podcast. So, but the way Geoffrey approaches it is that he kind of keeps Ray happy for a couple of choruses, you know, playing really swinging bluesy sort of things, and then out of nowhere he'll go into a sort of a much more modern take on the tune, and it's like you're being transported into outer space, you know, and then he'll bring you back again, and you'll be grooving, you know, just relishing in the groove and enjoying the sort of the rhythmic aspect of things. And I don't know, he's got a gift of really sort of just injecting these modern sort of things, as well as maintaining the unique sort of tradition of jazz piano, like I said, coming from those pianists, sort of Oscar, Bud Powell, you know, and Gene Harris and people like that. So very groove related. Now Geoffrey's a fantastic soloist, and I'm going to demonstrate. Well, I'm not going to demonstrate. I'm going to let him demonstrate his ability to solo. And what I want you to listen out for here is the way he builds the solo, and how many different sort of stylistic elements that he includes. I mean, you've got the blues, you've got some Latin things going on, you've got, you know, elements of space and virtuosic runs and interesting scales and things going on. You know, his solos really do have it all. They sort of summarize everything about the tune. And that's something that I think Herbie Hancock does very well. And I know that Geoffrey's a big Herbie Hancock fan, so maybe that's something he's developed from Herbie. But yeah, he just has this amazing ability to really summarize everything that's going on in the tune and still have the space to put his own stamp on it. I mean, how he does it is quite beyond me. But anyway, have a listen to this. This is Geoffrey's solo on Falling Up. Stunning. It's absolutely stunning. So many different things going on there in his solo, the way he builds up. I think next week what we'll do is I'll go through some very specific things that are unique to, or not necessarily unique. I mean, the thing about Geoffrey is that he has taken things from the past, you know, things that Phineas Newborn does, things that Mulgrew Miller does, but he's got a way of injecting his personality into all of it. So, you know, I mean, he can play stride piano, he can play double octaves, like faster than, geez, unbelievable, you know, ridiculous. And so maybe I'll go through some of those techniques and show you what they mean, because you may well have heard people talk about them and you think, well, what does that mean? Or what does that sound like, more importantly? So I'll go into detail more sort of next week. We'll check that out. But yeah, what a soloist. What a soloist. You've really got to get this album. It's fantastic. Falling Up, and it's on Max Jazz. Just buy it. It's an absolutely brilliantly made, recorded album. It's a beautiful sound, you know, and the playing and the composition, the writing, the arranging, it's all exquisite stuff. Brilliant music. And, you know, get it and enjoy it. Hi guys, and welcome to the guest artist interview. We're very privileged to have the great Geoffrey Keezer joining us today. And Jeff, I'd just like to say thank you for becoming a patron of Brighton Jazz School.
Of course,
and,
yeah, my pleasure.
It really makes a big difference to us, and to have someone of your stature, you know, come and give talks to the students, and just your presence is very much appreciated. I'd like to go back to the beginning. You know, you got interested in music at a very young age. I believe your parents were both musical.
Yeah.
Dad played drums?
Dad's a drummer.
Yeah.
Mom played French horn and taught piano and voice at home.
Cool.
And Mom was the classical side and Dad was the jazz side. And between the two of them, they had a pretty cool record collection, pretty diverse, you know. So I was listening to, I was born in 1970, so the stuff I was listening to as a, you know, very young kid was like Weather Report and Return to Forever and other things like Oscar Peterson trios, Chick Corea and Gary Burton. And my favorite record of all was by Oscar Brown Jr., the singer, called Sin and Soul. And that was the record that he had written lyrics to Work Song by Nat Adderley and Got Dare by Bobby Timmons and Afro Blue. I mean, songs that have become really, you know, popular, you know, jazz lyrics. and that was a really deep record because I didn't really, I had no idea about race or black and white and all that stuff. I just loved the music and the way it felt. But listening to that record now as an adult, I go, whoa, that's some really heavy stuff on there, you know. And the record is very theatrical too. It kind of, you know, has like kind of skits on it. It's sort of a precursor to a lot of the hip hop stuff, you know. Now, like he was very ahead of his time. So that record was one of my favorites. I listened to it literally every single day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I'll have to check that out. No, I haven't heard that.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that. But,
Sin and Soul.
Cool.
Amazing.
And so as a kid, I mean, was that the album that really sort of said, you know, I want to be a jazz musician, or
that one and Black Market by Weather Report?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Still to this day one of my favorite albums.
Yeah.
You know, just love it.
Yeah.
It's hardwired into my DNA.
Sure.
Like you can't remove it.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
So how did you then go about to make a start on, you know, becoming a jazz musician as a youngster?
I just loved music. I didn't know about genres or labels or any of that kind of stuff. I just loved music. I mean, at the same time I was listening to Beethoven symphonies and Bach organ works and just a lot of different things. I just loved music. I loved to play it and make it up. My parents tried to get me piano lessons, and I didn't like to play the lessons. I didn't like to practice or do what I was supposed to do. I just like to make up my own stuff. And I have now, in the time of this interview in 2012, I have a 4-year-old son, Cameron, at home, and I'm trying to teach him piano, and he's exactly the same way. He hates to read notes. He hates to do anything he's told, you know. But he loves to just go to the piano almost secretly and just make things up. And sometimes I hear him, and I try to encourage that. Or I'll say, we'll try to get him to maybe play it straight the first time and then let him improvise the second time, you know.
Yeah. It's funny. I was exactly the same.
Yeah.
And you know, I think maybe that's why gravitate towards jazz. You have the freedom there to kind of express yourself a bit more.
When I really found out what jazz really was, I think it was the record We Want Miles that I heard as a maybe 13-year-old or 14-year-old, and which really got me into Miles, you know. And then I went from We Want Miles to starting to listen to some of the older stuff, you know, Milestones and Kind of Blue and all that.
Yeah.
But it was through a contemporary sort of door that I got in touch with the older stuff of jazz. It wasn't that, for me, it wasn't Kind of Blue, wasn't a revelation, you know. I mean, it was more like hearing Miles playing We Want Miles or Star People or Decoy, that stuff, and falling in love with that sound, and then going back and finding out more of the history of it, you know. Yeah.
And when did you start doing? When was your first gig? Can you remember?
My first gig was probably 14 years old, and I played with my dad's band. My dad was playing drums, and I actually started out on drums.
Okay.
I wanted to be like Dad, of course, you know. And I played drums in the percussion section in all through high school, and in the marching band. I played snare drum and all that, and football games. You know, growing up in Wisconsin, you know, so you're out there in February in like, you know, sub-zero weather, you know, playing rudimental snare drums and stuff. Horrible, but I could work. You know, I could do gigs on piano. I was interested in both piano and drums, and eventually gravitated towards just doing piano because not only could I work in my dad's band on piano, but it gave me a chance to, like a way to write music. You know, write my own music, and we were playing 2 or 3 nights a week at a hotel bar, you know, and but we could play anything we wanted. And it wasn't top 40. It was like we were playing jazz and playing real book tunes. So that's where I learned the whole vocabulary and all the repertoire. You know, and managed to keep my grades up. somehow through school.
Right.
You know?
Gigging as well as
getting like no sleep, but
Sure.
I did it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And were you like the star student in your school music department?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But I got to because there was a good college jazz program in my town.
Okay.
I'm talking about Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and still to this day, it's a really fantastic program. They've got a great, they've got 3 or 4 big bands,
Wow.
you know, at least a dozen small groups, you know, a good. They've got actually a good program all through their high schools as well.
Okay.
You know, and when I was in high school, I was playing piano in the college jazz ensemble as well.
Right.
So
Right.
they let me do that, and that was another opportunity to learn how to write
Sure.
for big
yeah.
band. And I would also write. My dad conducted his own. I wasn't in my dad's. I wasn't in the college ensemble that my dad was conducting. It was in a different one, but he had a band as well, and I was writing for his group. So I had just a lot of opportunities to write and actually get my music played by real people. This was before, not before MIDI necessarily, but before really people had access to good sounding samples, and you know, and I didn't have any computer. I didn't get into using a computer for music notation until just a few years ago.
Right.
So I mean, I learned to write by pencil and paper, and by actually taking it in and having somebody play it and actually hearing it. You know what I mean? And that was really valuable, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
well, there's an art to that too. You know, writing a score as well, which seems to be lost. Now with Sibelius and things. But
well, I mean, Sibelius is. I use Sibelius, and it's a great tool. And it's been a huge time saver for me when I have to copy parts and do all that kind of stuff. And for example, right now I'm producing. There's a singer, jazz singer in the States named Denise Donatelli, and I'm producing and arranging for her.
Great.
And on her recordings, and you know, singers sometimes they like to change the keys. They'll say, you know what, doesn't feel comfortable here. Let's take it down a step or something. And you just click a button and bam, you've got new charts. You know, so it's a huge time saver that way.
It is. Yeah.
And it makes everything look nice and clean. And,
you know. Absolutely.
But I still, when I write, when I compose and sit down at the piano, I still sit down with manuscript paper and a pencil, and I write everything by hand first, and then I put it in the computer after. And I've never used the computer
as a tool itself.
To write directly, except for one song.
Okay.
Because the lyrics, I wrote a piece called "Knowing" for big band and and a singer named Julia Dollison, and the lyrics themselves were taken from a blog. So I thought it would be interesting just as a project to see if I could take something that was completely that existed only in, you know, online or only in the digital world, and actually write the music that way too.
Okay.
You know what I mean? But and I wrote it on a tour bus one night, you know, overnight. But I mean, 99.99% of the time I'm actually sitting at the piano with, you know, going through that tedious process. And I don't even erase, I just scratch it out.
Yeah.
It looks horrible.
Yeah.
You know, I can't even read my own writing half the time. And there's arrows going all over the place, and you know, you need a GPS to get through it.
So I mean, it is very much like a map. Then you're just kind of jotting down different ideas, and then
And then
when do you actually? How long is it from that stage before you actually commit it to paper in a more kind of concrete way?
It varies, you know, but the nice thing about using the computer then is that once you get everything notated, and if you want to move sections around, it's really easy to do it.
Sure. That's great. Okay.
Yeah.
When did you meet James Williams? When and how did you meet James Williams?
I met James Williams in 1985. I was 15 years old.
Yeah.
And at the time there was an organization in the States called the National Association of Jazz Educators, which became the International Association of Jazz Educators. They're no longer around, but they would have a convention every year, somewhere in the States, and there was a sort of a competition to be, they call it the Young Talent Award or something, and you know, if you got in, they'd fly you down to their convention, and you played in a little concert with the other Young Talent Award winners, and that year it was myself and Stephen Scott on piano, and Roy Hargrove on trumpet, and a bass player named Nathan Berg, and a couple other guys. I don't remember the other ones, but that's where I met Roy Hargrove and Stephen, and I'd been just sort of starting to get into buying jazz records, and I would go to the record store at the time. It was such a thing,
right.
you know, and actually buy albums, and I would just buy anything that looked cool. And I remember seeing a record called Progress Report by James Williams, and I didn't know James was playing. I just thought, well, this looks cool. I'll get this, and an Alter Ego too. And so I had those records by him, and when I got to the convention, I remember walking into the lobby and looking around, and it was like, oh, you know, because I'm looking, I see, oh my God, there's Dizzy Gillespie, there's Terrence Blanchard, Donald Harrison, there's James Williams, there's Mulgrew Miller, there's like James Moody, you know, all these jazz musicians that I was into. I was transcribing. You know, I was like, there they are. In the flesh, for real, you know. So I remember just walking up to James and just saying, hey, I'm a big fan. I've got your records, and would you consider giving me a lesson? You know, the stuff that kids do to me now. You know, and I try to remember how gracious James was. And other guys like Herbie Hancock, and I've got a Herbie story that'll blow your mind. I went to see Herbie Hancock's trio in like 1988 or 9, playing at the Blue Note in New York City, and it was the trio he had at the time with Buster Williams and Al Foster, and I walked right up to Herbie. He had just finished the set, and if you know the Blue Note, it's jam packed. I mean, they just pack people in there, and everyone's still paying their bills. And he literally just walked off the stage, and I ran right up to him, Mr. Hancock, I'm Geoff Keezer. I play piano, and can I ask you some questions? He goes, sure. You know, I said, okay, 3 questions. What are the last 4 chords on Dolphin Dance? What are the right chords? And what's the turnaround on Footprints? What's the correct turnaround on Footprints? And how did you come up with that big chord on Eye of the Hurricane? You know, And he goes, oh, here, I'll show you. Come up to the piano. So he walks right back up. I mean, he literally had only been off stage for maybe 5 minutes. Everyone's still sitting there. You know, people are paying their tabs. And he gives me a 10-minute private lesson on stage.
Amazing.
I mean, maybe there were other people standing around. I had no idea. I was just like, oh my God, you know. But I thought that is so cool, because he was so relaxed, and he not only just he didn't just answer my questions. He explained, you know, where his concept came from, where, you know, how that concept of that chord arose. For you jazz piano players, he was stacking diminished chords. He stacked an F diminished chord, and then a G diminished chord on top of that, and an A diminished chord on top of that, and then he picked a few notes from each one, and that voicing became that chord on Eye of the Hurricane. And he said some other things like, sometimes I just look at the piano and I'll see a shape, some kind of visual thing, without even knowing how it sounds, and just play it just to see what happens. And all these neat little tricks and secrets and things, and he just shared it with me as if it was just, you know, no skin off his back at all. And I thought, that is just the coolest thing ever. You know, he could have been like, oh, kid, I don't have time for this. I just finished my gig. I got to go to the dressing room or whatever. So I remember that, and he's still like that. I mean, I can go up to him and he'll, you know, you just ask him anything, and he'll just if he's got time, he'll talk to you. And I try to always remember to be that way with other young musicians now, you know. And Chick Corea too. Very, very generous, open personality. You know, just in terms of like how just generous and open most of these guys were towards me. And James said, yeah, sure, just meet me I think we ended up doing it at like 2 o'clock in the morning or something, you know. This is when we could get a piano in a room,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
And we just hung out for a couple hours. He didn't charge me anything.
Sure.
And he told me about Phineas Newborn Jr.
Right.
And that's where I found out about him.
Yeah, yeah.
And so James and I started corresponding. I would get together with my dad on drums and my other friends who played music in my hometown, and we'd make these little recording sessions of my music, whatever I was writing at the time, and maybe every 6 months or every 3 months we'd record something, and I'd send James a tape.
Great.
You know.
Yeah, yeah.
And when I was about 17, or maybe 18, 17, I guess, James called me up and said, "Well, I've got Francois Zalakane from Sunnyside Records interested in recording you."
Wow.
And James was the producer, and he said, "You can have anybody you want, and it will be Tony Reedus on drums." I said, "Oh, okay, sure." I'd met Rufus Reed because he came to my hometown as a clinician,
right,
and played it with our big band. So I thought, well, I kind of knew Rufus, so maybe he could be on bass, and I knew, you know, I knew Billy Pierce's playing, and Bill Mobley's playing, and Steve Nelson, you know, from various records that I had. So I kind of thought, well, that would be a fun band. So I made my first record when I was 17 years old,
sure.
you know, and James ended up producing my first 4 albums.
Right. Okay.
Waiting in the Wings, Curveball,
Yeah.
Here and Now, and one called Other Spheres.
Yeah. Yeah.
But by the time we did Other Spheres, I was kind of moving into other spheres. No, but just kind of thinking about different kinds of music, and I was really getting into like Wayne Shorter's,
that really,
you know, kind of way of writing, contemporary way of writing, and I was kind of more producing myself at that point.
Sure. Yeah.
But James, absolutely, I believe more than anyone else, I have a career in music because of him. You know, he introduced me to Art Blakey.
Sure. Yeah.
And that was my first major gig.
Yeah.
And then he recommended me to Art Farmer. When James was getting ready to leave Art Farmer's band, he pulled me in on that gig.
Yeah.
And of course the Contemporary Piano Ensemble. You know, I'm eternally grateful to this man, because he did so much for me, and not only me, but for so many other musicians, for Mulgrew, for Donald Brown, Harold Mayburn, guys like Charles Thomas from Memphis, and he pulled Phineas Newborn out of obscurity as well.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
along with Ray Brown helping Phineas kind of resurface in the 70s. You know, but.
No, amazing spirit.
Amazing guy.
I just don't know where he got all the time from. You know, he was like he was living in another time zone or something. He would always have time for me.
He just made the time.
You know,
He did. He really
amazing.
He made it a priority, supporting musicians and helping people.
Yeah. So what was it like when you got the phone call from Art Blakey? I mean, I can't imagine that feeling.
It was cool. It was, I mean, you've heard this thing called the law of attraction, or the secret, you know?
Yeah.
It's becoming kind of a pop psychology thing now, but it's or pop spirituality maybe, but it's real. And when people started telling me about the law of attraction stuff, I went, well, I know this. I know this is true because this is how my life has been.
Sure. And
how it worked for me. When I was about 15 years old, Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, this is again like mid-'80s, they came to Wisconsin to play a concert. It was the band with Mulgrew and Terrence and Donald and Lonnie Plaxico and John Toussaint, and it was in the middle of February, and it was about a 4-hour drive from where I lived, and a bunch of my jazz nerd friends, we all we begged my dad to drive us, please. It was a blizzard, it was snowing, it's please, it's Art Blakey, come on, Dad, you got to take us. And about halfway through, he's like, I'm turning around, I can't deal. He's like, no, please. We begged him, so he took us to this concert, and I went, wow, because I had some of Art Blakey's records, And then I was like, here he is. I'm seeing him on stage. What an incredible thing. It was maybe the first jazz concert I'd seen, you know, by a real, one of the cats, you know, one of the guys. And I went, ooh, this is the coolest thing ever. I really want to be in this band someday. And so when we got home, I put together a little ensemble with my friends, and we played that music. Like, let's play Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers tunes. You know? And we learned as many of those tunes as we could. And then when I got to Berkeley in '88, I joined the Art Blakey Ensemble. It was a class, and it was led by Billy Pierce, who the saxophonist, who's an alumnus, and we rehearsed in a room that was next door to the Iron Maiden Ensemble.
And you were louder, right?
No, they were louder than us, certainly. But it was funny because I knew all their tunes too. You know, I played keyboard bass in a metal band, you know, when I was like 15. But so, you know, I was learning more of that repertoire and really focusing very almost, you know, myopically on Art Blakey. And then I remember I was going to school in Boston, Berkeley in Boston. I took the train down to New York about once a month to hang out with James, and he'd take me around the clubs, and he took me up to Mcconnell's, which was a club on the Upper West Side, to see Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, and he introduced me to Art, and Art says, well, come on up and sit in, or something like that. You know, I said, okay. I was ready, because I knew all the music, you know. I was ready. So I got up, we played Monin, and we played maybe Mayray, one of those tunes, and the theme, you know. I played like the last 3 tunes of the set or something. And it was cool, but I wasn't, I mean, I was like, I felt really calm and focused, because I'd been already playing this music for like 2 or 3 years, you know. And then again in Boston, when they came up to play at the Regatta Bar in the Charles Hotel, Benny Green was the pianist, and he was very graciously let me sit in, and I played a couple more tunes with the band, and then I remember sitting sort of by the door, and after the show, and Art Blakey walks up to me and says, give me your passport and social security number.
Wow.
And I said, okay. He says, you're going to be a jazz messenger soon. I said, wow, great. You know, didn't really think anything of it. He wasn't officially hiring me, but then I moved to New York that fall with a friend of mine who just needed a roommate. He says, get in the car, we're going to New York. I said, well, I should probably, you know, stay in school another year or 2. He's like, get in the car, get your stuff. You know, I think all my stuff fit into one box probably, you know. All right, so we moved to New York, found a place, and within a week of moving to New York, I got a call from Art's road manager. I don't have a clue how he found me, how they even knew I was in New York, or anything.
Wow.
But they got my number, they called me up, and they said, Art wants you to start with him at Sweet Basil in the fall.
Wow.
But it was like, none of it came as a shock, because it was just like, I just had, from about age 14, from the first time I saw the band, I was like,
that's it.
I'm going to be in this band. You know, and I didn't have to schmooze anybody or manipulate anybody or pay anybody off or anything. It was just, bam. That's what it was going to be, and there wasn't any other option for me.
Sure.
You know. So then when I met Miles Davis, right around the same time, just after joining Art Blakey's band, I met Miles Davis because I was recommended to Miles by Al Foster, the drummer. I had played a rehearsal with Al Foster and Roy Hargrove and some guys. When Roy was getting ready to record his first record, he wasn't quite sure what he wanted to do, so we tried out. Roy was my roommate at Berkeley, by the way.
Right, okay.
We had a teeny little room, bunk beds, you know. And so we were trying various things, and we did a rehearsal with Al on drums. And Al, being close to Miles, had recommended me to Miles. He said, there's this young piano player you should hear. So I went to meet Miles, and I was wearing these really bad big glasses and like a trench coat, and I had this like 1940s Jimmy Stewart, you know, haircut. And I looked so super dorky, and I went up to Miles. I said, hey, Miles, I'm that piano player that Al Foster told you about. And he looks at me and goes, you look like you can't do nothing. And I just kind of laughed, and he gave me a hug. He's like, come here, that. I went, wow. And so I hung out with Miles a few times in different places, and once in his apartment, and he was interested in work. He said we should work together, and he told me something that to this day, the older I get, the more it means. And and he said at the time, because he knew I had just joined Art Blakey's band, and he said, yeah, Art's always been one of my favorite drummers, and I told that, I ran back to Art Blakey. I said, Art, Miles just, Art. He said, Miles just said you're one of his favorite drummers. He's like, oh, he got a lot of favorite drummers, like that. These two were like, But Miles said, yeah, you're with Art Blakey. That's cool, but you need to be in a situation where you're uncomfortable.
Sure.
To grow as a musician.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
And I thought, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But the reason I didn't leave Art Blakey and go with Miles, even though Miles was more famous and it was, he was playing bigger venues, and I could have said, wow, I'm in Miles Davis's band, but I didn't really want to play the music he was playing at the time. He was doing, like, playing Cyndi Lauper covers, and it was just kind of like, the keyboard role wasn't that much fun. It was kind of playing like parts and triads and stuff. If it was now, I'd be like, yeah, sure, it'd be great, let's do it, it'll be fun, you know what I mean? But I thought, I'd put so much energy and attention into being a jazz messenger and doing the Art Blakey, that path, that I didn't want to just leave that after like 2 or 3 months and go do something completely different, But, how cool, but at least I feel like I never got to play in Miles's band, but I at least got to meet him a few times and talk to him, but that advice about like, you're never going to grow as a musician unless you're uncomfortable is really interesting, because it can mean a lot of things. It can mean, like, if you're a student, it can mean that as a student you should seek out opportunities to play with people that are better than you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because
unless you're a little bit uncomfortable, it's not going to force you to rise to the occasion,
Yeah.
And I realized that that's how Miles, that was his philosophy, and that's how he lived his life, because he kept changing his band. As soon as it got to be like a comfortable thing, he'd be like, change it again. And they say Miles changed music 3 or 4 times in his career. Not just his music, but he changed music.
Yeah.
But for him, I think it was personal growth, really.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone sets out to innovate as much as you just, he needed to do it for his own personal growth.
Yeah.
And sometimes even it can apply to other areas of life. If you're having a conversation with people and the things they're talking about are kind of outside of your comfort zone or something, but you can actually grow into that experience and actually, you literally grow. You actually gain more space, in your head or whatever, and the ability to tolerate different viewpoints and
I try and push my students in at the deep end, because there's a jam session after the course, and a lot of them say, oh, well, I'm not good enough to get up and play yet, and I say, well,
but that's absolutely,
when are you actually ever going to think that you're good enough?
That's when you have to get up there.
Exactly.
And you have to get your ass kicked.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have
to.
That's the only way you're going to get better. Yeah.
What a great interview, and there's more of that coming up next week. We'll do the rest of it next week, so make sure you tune in, don't miss it. It's such a great honour for us to have Geoffrey as patron of Brighton Jazz School. And, you know, these podcasts are really historical documents as well, because I'm talking to some of the best jazz musicians in the world, and they're going to be stored forever online, you know. So this is a historical document of, like I said, some of the best jazz musicians around at this current time in the year 2012. So I'm so glad you can be a part of this, and please keep writing in and letting me know your questions. Any feedback that you give is very much welcomed. And like I said, I really want to make this an interactive podcast. So you're more than welcome to write in and ask specific questions, or, you know, can you interview this guy? Can you review this CD? Whatever you want, you know. So please write in. Where can you do that? I hear you ask. It is www.brightonjazzschool.com/podcast, and there's a forum on there. Failing that, if that's a bit complicated, then you can write to me at brightonjazzschool@gmail.com as well. So thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Obviously, this podcast is slightly different to the norm, but as you'll appreciate, when we've got someone as sort of celebrity status like Geoffrey Keezer, you know, I could do nothing but dedicate the whole podcast to him. And he's been so kind in helping the Brighton Jazz School and doing masterclasses and things. So this is a sort of homage to Mr. Keezer, or Dr. Keezer, Dr. K, as many people call him. So I'd like to just say thank you to Geoffrey for giving up his time on that Sunday. I think the band were just back from Hamburg and pretty jet lagged from coming over from the States. The band, incidentally, were the Storms Nocturnes Trio, and I'll be doing a complete show on Tim Garland, including playing tracks from Via, their latest album, which is absolutely stunning. The guys at the Brighton Jazz School and myself went down to the South Bank Centre, the Purcell Rooms, last Monday to check out the concert, and it was just incredible. I think everybody had such a great time. It was fantastic. We hired a bus, actually, from Choice Rentals, so thank you to you guys. And we had a bit of a jazz outing. It was really good fun. A lot of driving for me, but nevertheless, it was well worth it to see the Storms Nocturnes Trio in action. So thank you to Tim Garland, thank you to Joe Locke, and of course, thank you to Geoffrey Keezer. And finally, thank you to Mike, who is, as ever, the glue of Brighton Jazz School, for putting together this podcast, editing it in the masterful way that he does. And thank you to all my students for being amazing. And you, the listeners, thank you for tuning in. Stay in contact. Write me an email. Let me know what you think of the podcast. It's really, really beneficial for me to be able to stay in touch with you, to make this a better listening experience for you. And I'd just like to leave you with this absolutely stunning track. This is a world exclusive of Geoffrey Keezer's new album entitled Heart of the Piano, and this is a Donald Brown composition called New York, which was originally played by the Jazz Messengers, which featured Branford and Wynton Marsalis back then. So this is an absolutely incredible rendition, completely solo piano. I've listened to it a zillion times and I still cannot believe my ears. The different parts that are going along. This is a brilliant example of what we were talking about earlier on, you know, the orchestral approach. How he does it, I do not know, but take a listen, marvel, and go and buy this record when it comes out. In fact, buy every Geoffrey Keezer album. They're all good. They're all good. Okay, that's enough from me. I'll leave you in the capable hands of Mr. Geoffrey Keezer with Donald Brown's New York, and tune in next time for another edition of the Brighton Jazz School podcast. This is Wayne signing off.